My husband put his hand on her shoulder in front of 200 people and said, "This is Elena. She's the creative mind behind everything you're celebrating tonight." I was standing 6 feet away, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched. I watched the room turn toward her. I watched the smiles, the applause, the handshakes. I watched the award, the one with my name on the preliminary submission, the one I had spent 11 months designing, get absorbed into a story that didn't include me. My husband didn't look at me once. I set my glass down on the nearest table. I straightened my dress. And I smiled at the woman beside me, the one I didn't know, who had no idea what she had just witnessed. Then I walked to the coat check, retrieved my things, and left the Meridian Hotel without saying goodbye to anyone. That was the night I stopped being his wife in every way that mattered. The paperwork just hadn't caught up yet. His name was Nathan. We had been married for 9 years. We met when I was 29 and he was 34, at a small architecture firm in Chicago, where I was a junior designer and he was the charming project manager who knew how to talk to clients in a way that made them feel like they were the smartest people in the room. He was good at that, making people feel seen. It was the thing I loved most about him in the beginning, before I understood that he only did it when there was something in it for him. We started the firm together 3 years into our marriage. My designs, his client relationships. That was the agreement. Spoken and unspoken. I drew the concepts, built the presentations, sourced the materials, managed the creative team. He took the meetings, signed the contracts, handled the finances. We were partners in the truest sense, and for a while it worked. The first time I noticed something shift was 4 years ago, when a profile ran in a Chicago design magazine. The journalist had interviewed both of us separately. In my portion, I spoke at length about the Harlow Residence project, the one that had gotten us our first major national attention. The one I had redesigned 3 times until it was exactly right. When the article published, my quotes were trimmed to 2 sentences. My husband's were a full page. The headline read, "Nathan Whitfield, the architect of modern restraint." I mentioned it to him that evening. He said the journalist had probably just found him more quotable. He said I should be proud that the firm was getting recognition. He said I was being sensitive. I filed it away. I kept designing. The second time was 2 years ago, when we were shortlisted for the Meridian Prize, which, as it happened, was the same award being presented at the gala the night he pointed to Elena and called her the creative mind behind everything. Our shortlisting had been based on the Caldwell Tower lobby renovation. I had spent 7 months on that project. I had flown to Portland 4 times to meet with the clients. I had hand-selected every material, every fixture, every lighting element. When we were shortlisted, my husband gave an interview to a trade publication in which he said, and I quote, "Our team's vision, not my vision, our team's," as if I were simply a member of the staff. I mentioned that one too. He told me I was reading into things. I filed it away. I kept designing. The third time, the time that should have been the last time but wasn't, because I was still trying, was when he hired Elena. He told me she was a project coordinator. That's what the contract said. That's what he told the team. But within 6 weeks, she was sitting in on my client calls. Within 3 months, she had a key to the private design studio on the 4th floor that I had always kept locked. Within 6 months, she was being CC'd on every email chain that used to include only me. I knew. Of course I knew. I had known before she arrived, if I'm honest. There are things a woman understands about her marriage that she cannot always put into words, but that live in her body like a low-grade fever, present every day, manageable, easy to explain away until suddenly it isn't. What I didn't know, what I had not yet allowed myself to fully comprehend, was that it wasn't just personal. It was professional. He wasn't only replacing me in our bed. He was replacing me in our company. And he had been planning it long enough that by the time I stood in that ballroom watching him credit her for the work I had bled over, the infrastructure was already in place. The drive home from the gala took 22 minutes. I spent the first 10 of them sitting in the parking garage with my hands on the steering wheel, not crying, just breathing. I spent the next 12 driving in silence with the radio off. When I got home, I went straight to my home office. I sat down at my desk. I opened my files. I want to be clear about something. I am not a spontaneous person. I don't make decisions from anger. Anger had been burning in me for 2 years at minimum, and I had not acted on it once. What had changed was not my emotion. What had changed was my clarity. Standing in that ballroom, watching my husband's hand on her shoulder. I had finally understood with complete certainty that waiting was no longer a strategy. It was a surrender. So I sat at my desk and I opened my files and I began to look at what was mine. Here is what I found. The firm had been incorporated with both of our names on the filing, Whitfield and Lane Design, where Lane was my maiden name, a detail my husband had suggested and I had found sentimental at the time. What I had not paid close attention to, because I had trusted him and because I was always more interested in the work than the paperwork, was how the ownership structure had been quietly amended 18 months ago during a routine company reorganization. He had sent me documents to sign electronically, the way he always did, the way we handled hundreds of administrative tasks a year. I had signed them. What I had signed was a restructuring agreement that reduced my ownership share from 50% to 31%, with the remaining 19% transferred to a holding entity that I had never heard of. I sat with that for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and I called the one person I should have called years earlier. Her name was Dr. Judith Crane, and she lived in the gray stone townhouse directly across the street from us. She was 61, semi-retired, and she had spent 30 years as a corporate attorney specializing in intellectual property and business disputes. We had been friendly for 4 years, coffee on occasional Sunday mornings, conversations in the driveway, a bottle of wine once when both of our husbands were traveling. She had a dry wit and a habit of saying exactly what she thought, and I had always liked her more than I admitted to myself. I called her at 11:15 on a Friday night. She answered on the second ring. I said, "Judith, I need to ask you something." She said, "I've been wondering when you would." I didn't ask her what she meant by that. I just started talking. We met in her kitchen at midnight. I brought my laptop and a folder of files I had printed over the previous hour. She made coffee without asking if I wanted any, set a cup in front of me and read everything I put in front of her without speaking for 40 minutes. When she finished, she looked at me over her reading glasses. "Your design portfolio," she said. "The original concepts, the iteration files, the client correspondence, all of that is time-stamped and under your personal accounts?" "Everything I've created has been saved to my personal cloud since the beginning," I said. "I never moved my working files to the company server. Only the final deliverables." She nodded slowly. "And the Caldwell Tower project, the Harlow residence, the Meridian Prize submission. All original concept work originated with you." "Yes. Can you prove that?" "I have 11 years of files." She closed the folder. She picked up her coffee. She looked at me the way a person looks at a chessboard when they can already see the end of the game. "Tell me about the holding entity," she said. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was devastated. I had passed through devastation somewhere around the second year and come out the other side into something colder and more useful. I didn't sleep because I was working. Judith had given me a list of things to locate, copy, and preserve. I spent the hours between midnight and 6 in the morning doing exactly that. My husband came home at 2 in the morning. I heard the door, heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard him pause outside the office door. I had locked it. He knocked once. I didn't answer. He went to bed. In the morning, he came down to the kitchen where I was making coffee and he said, in the tone of a man who expects to be forgiven before he has apologized, "You left early last night." I handed him a cup of coffee. "I did," I said. "Elena was just." "I know who she is," I said. "I know what she is. I've known for a while." He set the cup down. His jaw tightened. I watched him calculate the way I had watched him calculate in client meetings when a negotiation wasn't going his way, when he was deciding whether to push forward or reframe. "Claire," he said, "you're overreacting." I looked at him for a long moment. 9 years of a face. 9 years of a voice. 9 years of filing things away and keeping designing and telling myself it was salvageable. "I'm not," I said. "But I appreciate you giving me such a clear view of things. It made a lot of decisions much easier." I picked up my own coffee and went upstairs to shower. I had an 8 o'clock meeting with Judith. What followed over the next 6 weeks was not dramatic in the way that people imagine these things to be. There were no screaming arguments, no thrown objects, no late-night confessions. There was paperwork. There were meetings with attorneys. There was a forensic accountant named Robert who wore the same gray cardigan to every meeting and spoke about financial irregularities with the enthusiasm of a man describing a particularly interesting hike. What Robert found, in addition to the restructured ownership agreement, was that the holding entity, a shell company registered in Delaware, had been receiving management fees from the firm for 14 months. The signatory on those transfers was my husband. The sole beneficiary of the holding entity was my husband. The fees totaled just under $200,000. None of it had been disclosed to me. I want to tell you about the day my husband came to the office and found his keycard deactivated. It was a Tuesday. He had a 10 o'clock client meeting, new clients, significant budget, the kind of project that would have kept the firm busy for a year. He swiped his card at the main entrance. The light stayed red. He tried again. Red. He called the front desk. Our office manager, a woman named Priya who had worked with me for 6 years and who I had taken into my confidence 3 days earlier, answered. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitfield," she said. "Your access credentials have been suspended pending the outcome of an ongoing legal matter. I'm not able to let you in at this time." I watched this happen from the second floor window. I had not planned to watch, but I found myself standing there anyway, coffee in hand, observing. He looked up. I don't know if he could see me clearly through the glass. I didn't move. He called my cell phone. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times. I let them all go to voicemail. Then he stood on the sidewalk in front of the building where we had built something together, in his good coat, in the cold, and I watched him understand that the meeting he had scheduled with the new clients was about to happen without him because I had called those clients the previous evening, explained that I would be their sole point of contact going forward, and sent them a portfolio of my work that made clear exactly whose creative vision had been operating the firm for the past 9 years. They showed up at 10 o'clock. They signed with me by 11:15. The divorce proceedings were what my attorney called straightforward, given the documentation. My husband hired 2 lawyers. They sent a great number of letters. Judith, who had referred me to a litigation attorney named Marcus Webb, who had the calm demeanor of a man who had won every fight he'd ever been in, responded to each letter with the precision of a person who had been waiting a long time to do exactly this. The ownership restructuring was challenged and reversed. The $200,000 in undisclosed management fees became the centerpiece of a separate legal action. My husband's attorney suggested, at one point, that we consider mediation. My attorney said, politely, that we were comfortable proceeding. There is a moment I want to tell you about. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in March, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown office building. During a deposition, my husband's attorney asked me, with the slightly contemptuous tone that some people use when they are trying to make you feel small, "Mrs. Whitfield, can you describe your actual role in the day-to-day operations of Whitfield and Lane Design?" I looked at him. "I am the designer," I said. "I have originated every major concept the firm has produced in 11 years. I hold the copyright on all original design work created prior to my formal exit from the company. I have the time-stamped files, the client correspondence, and 11 years of iteration documentation to support that. I also have the deposition of the firm's former creative director, 2 senior designers, and 3 clients who have provided written statements confirming whose work they were actually engaging with when they contracted with the firm." There was a pause. "Additionally," I said, "I have the original licensing agreements for the design assets that the firm is currently using in its active projects, all of which are registered in my name personally and not in the company's name, because my husband always told me the administrative details were handled and I would like to thank him for that oversight." The deposition ended 40 minutes later. We were in the hallway when my attorney leaned toward me and said, quietly, "You've been preparing for this for a while, haven't you?" I said, "I've been designing for a while. It's the same skill set." He laughed. It was the first time I had heard him laugh in 3 months of working together. "I want to tell you about my husband's mother, because she is important to this story and because she surprised me in a way I did not expect. Her name is Barbara. She is 67, a retired school principal from Evanston, a woman of few words and strong opinions and an absolute commitment to what she considers the correct way to behave. She had been my mother-in-law for 9 years. We were not close, but we were civil, and I had always respected her. She called me 2 weeks before the settlement hearing. "Claire," she said, "I want you to know that I've spoken with Nathan. I told him that what he did was wrong. Not just legally. Wrong." I didn't say anything for a moment. "He didn't listen," she said. "He never does. But I wanted you to hear it from me." I thanked her. "I also want you to know," she said, That the piece of artwork in the front hallway of your house, the one my grandmother painted, Nathan told me it was with a storage company. I'd like it back, if that's possible. I'll have it delivered to you this week, I said. Thank you. A pause. He married you because you were talented and he knew it, she said. That's not a compliment to him. I want you to understand that. I understand that. We didn't speak again after that, but when I packed the last of my things from the house 3 weeks later, we had sold it, split the proceeds as agreed in the settlement. I found a card on the kitchen counter. It was from Barbara. It had no message inside, only her home address in Evanston written in her careful, principal's handwriting. An invitation to stay in touch, in the language of a woman who didn't make grand gestures. I kept it. The settlement was reached on a Thursday. My husband received 31% of the firm's equity, which was what he had manipulated me into reducing my share to, and which my attorney had argued, successfully, was all he was entitled to given the restructuring fraud. The undisclosed management fees were returned in full plus interest. The firm was renamed. He had 30 days to remove his name. I stood outside on the steps of the building afterward. It was cold. March in Chicago is its own particular kind of stubborn cold winter that refuses to accept it's over. I had a scarf that my husband had given me for my birthday 2 years ago. I had worn it without thinking that morning. I stood there for a moment, aware of it around my neck, and then I took it off and folded it neatly and left it on the concrete step and walked to my car. I don't know if anyone saw. I don't know if it meant anything to anyone but me. It meant something to me. Here is what my life looks like now. The firm is called Lane Design Studio. We are 18 months out from the relaunch, and we have just been shortlisted again. This time only my name on the submission for the Meridian Prize. I have a team of 7. Priya is still my office manager. I have a senior designer named Tom who I hired away from a firm in New York, and a junior designer named Keisha who reminds me of myself at 26 in all the ways that matter. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the 23rd floor of a building in Lincoln Park with floor-to-ceiling windows that look west. I watched the sunset from those windows on my first evening there, with a glass of wine and nothing to file away, and I sat with that for a long time. Judith came for dinner 3 weeks after I moved in. She brought a very good bottle of Burgundy and we sat at my new dining table and talked for 4 hours. At one point she said, "You know, I noticed things over the years. I didn't feel it was my place." "You answered at 11:15 on a Friday night," I said. "That was your place, exactly when it needed to be." She stayed until midnight. On her way out, she stopped at the window and looked at the city spread out below us, the lights coming on in the early dark of a March evening. "You built something real," she said. "Not the marriage. The work." "Yes," I said. "That's what he couldn't take," she said. "That's why he tried to rename it." She was right. That was the part that had taken me the longest to understand, not that he had been unfaithful, not that he had loved someone else, but that he had needed to make my work his. Needed to stand in front of rooms full of people and be the name attached to it. Because without that transfer he was only the man who handled the contracts. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I say it because understanding it was what allowed me to stop making myself smaller for it. You can't keep compressing yourself to fill a shape someone else cut out for you. Eventually the pressure becomes structural. I am 41 years old. My firm has 3 active projects in 2 states. I have a deposition on file in which I described 11 years of documented creative work in front of 2 lawyers and a court reporter, and when it was over, my attorney told me I had done well, and I thought this is what it feels like to stand in the right-sized space. My husband is still in Chicago. I see him occasionally, in the way that people who share a professional world occasionally see each other across a lobby, at the edges of an industry event. He is running a smaller firm now, with Elena, though I understand from mutual acquaintances that it is primarily a client management practice and not a design shop. He looks well enough. I wish him no specific harm. I also wish him no specific good. He simply exists in the world, as he always did, and the world has made the appropriate adjustments. I want to say one thing directly to whoever is listening to this, because I have thought about what I would have wanted to hear 9 years ago or 6 years ago, or even 2 years ago when I was still filing things away and keeping designing and telling myself patience was the same as wisdom. Financial independence is not a backup plan. It is not something you build as insurance against worst-case scenarios. It is the foundation. It is the thing you own that no one can restructure or rename or stand in front of 200 people and claim for themselves. My mistake was not in trusting my husband. My mistake was in trusting him with the infrastructure of my own work, the contracts, the filings, the administrative details that felt tedious and that I handed over because I preferred to spend my time on the things I loved. Those details were not tedious. Those details were the architecture beneath the architecture. And once I understood that, I made sure every brick of it had my name on it in writing. I keep the original framing sketches from the Harlow residence in a frame on my office wall. The first iteration, in pencil on grid paper, with my handwriting in the margins. It is not a beautiful document. It is a working document. It has coffee stains on the top right corner and an erased line running diagonally across the lower half where I changed the sight line 3 weeks in. Clients ask about it sometimes. I tell them it's where everything started. I mean it in more ways than one. The lamp on my desk is one I designed and had made specifically for this office. The chair I work in cost more than my first month's salary at the architecture firm where I met my husband. The view from my window belongs to no one but the person sitting in front of it. Everything in this room, I chose. Everything in this room, I own. Nobody laughed at me to get here. But if they had, I'd have made sure they had a very good seat for what came next.